Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, where we discuss infamous cases of death and murder that have an element of food to them, and then we cook or sample the food from the case. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. As Americans, we love our Mafia history and our Mafia figures. One of the most famous of them has always been and remains Al Capone. He rose from the children's street gangs of New York through the ranks of the Mafia until he became the biggest boss in all of Chicago. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1889, in New York City to Italian immigrant parents. He quit school in the 6th grade and spent his days running with gangs of street kids. He joined gangs like the Bowery Boys and the Brooklyn Rippers, and then the 5 Points Gang as a teenager, and began working as a bouncer in neighborhood brothels. During this time, he apparently insulted a woman at the door of a club. Her brother took out a knife and slashed Capone 3 times on the left side of his face. The wounds didn't heal well, and they led to Capone's nickname, Scarface, which he loathed. Whenever he was photographed, he would try and hide the scarred left side of his face and would often tell people they were war wounds. He married Mae Josephine Coughlin when he was only 19 after she gave birth to their son, Albert Francis Sonny Capone. In his early 20s, he moved to Chicago at the request of his friend, Johnny Torrio, who was right underneath Big Boss Diamond Jim Colosimo. We've covered Diamond Jim, so check that episode out. And Capone became a bagman and bodyguard for Johnny Torrio, who, like I said, was high up in the Chicago Mafia, known as the Chicago Outfit. Torrio told boss Diamond Jim that Capone was an experienced bouncer, and so they employed him in their many brothels where Capone contracted syphilis. At that time, doctors were using salvarsan to treat syphilis, but Capone apparently never sought treatment. That poor decision would haunt him throughout his life. Boss Torrio was known as a cunning man, and he took a liking to Al Capone. Capone was brutal and dangerous, and soon Torrio had him assisting in his illegal alcohol operation, which was a great source of income for the Mafia during Prohibition. In January of 1925, Torrio got into a gun battle that almost killed him, and that was it for him. He retired and handed the reins to Capone. Capone loved being the boss. He loved attention, he loved power, he loved the way the crowd would cheer for him when he attended a ball game. He loved being in the limelight. Capone was a pretty shrewd businessman, and he started an operation with Canadian bootleggers who helped him smuggle liquor into the U.S. and made Capone and his gang a lot of money. There are some reports that they were making $1 million a month. If an establishment refused to buy liquor from Capone's operation, they would shortly find their establishment blown up. Over 100 people were killed in these Mafia war bombings in the 1920s, so there was a lot of violence happening at that time, but that didn't bother Al Capone. He indulged in gourmet food, plenty of cocktails, custom-made suits, large imported cigars, and lots of female companionship. He was famous for his flashy and expensive jewelry, as well as for telling people, "I'm a businessman. I give the people what they want. I satisfy a public demand." Well, that's one way to put it. Al Capone lived in Cicero, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He would use intimidation and bribery to make sure every public election went the way he wanted it to. There were several attempts on his life made by rival gangs, and Capone's driver was even tortured and murdered, but Capone himself was always able to survive these attempts. They did, however, make him more security conscious, and it was said that no one but his closest confidants ever knew his schedule, where he was going to travel to, or where he would dine. If you watch this channel, you know that going into a restaurant as a mobster, it was always a little dicey. For some reason, they really like to kill each other in restaurants. Capone had feuds with other Mafia bosses, but he was also famous, or infamous, for winning over powerful politicians who offered him protection and freedom. Al Capone is widely believed to have been responsible for the ordering of the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It is said he ordered these murders to eliminate Bugs Moran, who he believed hijacked a shipment of Canadian whiskey that belonged to him. We're going to cover the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in another episode, so I will leave details for when we do, but it was definitely a factor in Al Capone's ally, Mayor William Big Bill Thompson, losing the mayoral election because the public was tiring of the violence and Al Capone's stranglehold on the city. There's a famous story of Al Capone uncovering a plot to kill him, and him taking a baseball bat and beating the three men involved in the plot to death. But most believe this story is greatly exaggerated, as Capone was known to hire others to do his dirty work. He was also known to spread stories about himself to enhance his fearsome reputation. Now, don't get me wrong, Capone was vicious and known to have anyone who opposed him killed, even other mafia bosses like Joe Aiello. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre served as a turning point against Al Capone. The publisher of the Chicago Daily News went directly to his friend, President Herbert Hoover, and asked for his assistance in ending the lawlessness that had been so prevalent in Chicago for so many years. Hoover created the Chicago Crime Commission in March of 1929, which became the head of a multi-agency attack on Al Capone. They went at him from all angles. The Treasury and Justice Departments began investigating him for tax fraud, and a small but respected group of prohibition officers, which included Eliot Ness, went after Capone on bootlegging charges. Eliot Ness and Al Capone are forever tied together because in a city where Al Capone could corrupt anyone, he could not corrupt Eliot Ness. If you're into Mafia stuff, you're probably familiar with the movie The Untouchables. If you're too young to remember that movie, I would suggest watching it. It's fun and entertaining, but not very historical. Most Mafia experts agree that the urban legend of Eliot Ness and Al Capone has been greatly exaggerated over the years. Eliot Ness was persistent and determined to bring Al Capone down, and he had a large hand in that happening. Capone had been arrested many times over the years on everything from prohibition violations to weapons charges. In 1930, Al Capone built this mansion in Florida, but he was not welcome there. The governor wanted him run out of the state. They began arresting him for everything under the sun, including vagrancy, and even harassed his family because they wanted him gone so badly. But for all the violence and beatings and murder that Al Capone was responsible for, it was the tax man that brought him down. IRS Special Agent Frank J. Wilson was able to prove to the courts that the massive income of Al Capone was never accounted for in taxes. When Capone's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement to keep Capone out of prison, the government used the information they obtained as an admission that Capone had indeed evaded taxes, and they charged him with tax evasion. He was arrested and released on $50,000 bail. A week later, he was hit with a double whammy when Eliot Ness and his team of untouchables delivered information to the prosecutor that led to Capone's indictment on 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act, which outlined prohibition laws. On June 16, 1931, Al Capone pleaded guilty to income tax evasion and the 5,000 violations of prohibition laws. 5,000! 5,000. I bet there are very few cases on the books where someone is charged with 5,000 crimes. That's why he's Al Capone. The lawyers came up with a plea deal, and Capone agreed to spend 2.5 years in prison. Well, the deal fell apart when Capone's attorneys rescinded his guilty pleas. Prosecutors then refused to honor the deal of 2.5 years in prison, and Capone was then sentenced to 11 years in federal prison and ordered to pay court costs, fines, and back taxes with interest. He was sent to the Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary in May of 1932 at only 33 years old. During his first physical upon arrival, he was diagnosed with syphilis and gonorrhea. He was also suffering from withdrawal symptoms from cocaine addiction, which was so pervasive that the drug had perforated his nasal septum. Capone rapidly fell apart in prison. He would do his assigned job 8 hours a day, sewing the soles of shoes on, but could barely read and write and was seen by the other prisoners as weak. So it really does appear that he was never the tough guy he wanted others to believe he was. You Mafia buffs know that's a sharp contrast to a lot of mobsters who are actually incredibly vicious. A cellmate of Capone's named Red Rudensky was actually concerned Capone was going to have a mental breakdown and kind of became his protector. Other inmates were angry about this, and so Capone was moved to the recently opened Alcatraz federal pen for his own safety. He was stabbed in June of 1936 but recovered. He was actually a well-behaved prisoner who didn't cause any trouble and even played banjo in the Alcatraz prison band. But it didn't take long for him after going to Alcatraz to take a sharp turn for the worst. He had rapidly progressing neurosyphilis, which caused him to be confused and disoriented. He continued to decline mentally and was transferred to Terminal Island in California. He was paroled in 1939 after his wife appealed to the courts to release him due to the mental state he was in. His wife then tried to get him treated at Johns Hopkins, but they refused based on his reputation. But Union Memorial did accept him and began to treat him. He was actually one of the very first Americans to receive penicillin when it began to be mass-produced in 1942. And although it was too late to reverse the brain damage he suffered, it did slow the progression of his disease. Capone moved permanently to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida. His doctors stated that he had the mentality of a 12-year-old. He suffered a stroke in 1947 but survived it and began to improve. However, he then contracted bronchopneumonia, which led to heart failure. He died on January 25, 1946, of apoplexy. His body was transported back to Chicago and a private funeral was held. He was buried at Mount Oliver Cemetery in Chicago, but was later moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, where he remains today. Al Capone is one of the most famous and notorious gangsters of the 20th century. He has been portrayed in books and movies and TV shows. He is the model for the pinstriped suit-wearing, fedora-topped, cigar-smoking mafia man. Al Capone loved a great meal and a great cocktail. His favorite place to hang out was the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge, which amazingly is still open. It was originally called Pop Morse's Roadhouse, and it opened in 1907. It was renamed Green Mill Gardens in 1910. During Prohibition, one of Al Capone's crew members, Machine Gun Jack McGurn, bought part of the club and made sure his boss was always treated like royalty. Al Capone's favorite booth still sits in the club. It is located directly west of the Long Bar. Capone and his men liked it because it afforded clear views from the front and back entrances. Prohibition tunnels still run all over Chicago, and the Green Mill has access to them. Al Capone was known to use these access hatches and the tunnels to elude authorities when they came around to raid the Green Mill during Prohibition. The club became a reputable and famous jazz club after Prohibition, hosting artists like Billie Holiday and Al Jolson. The club currently hosts the longest-running poetry slam in the country, which takes place on Sunday nights. A shrine to Al Capone stands behind the bar as a tribute to both him and the early days of the establishment. Stay with me because right now I'm going to make some Prohibition-era cocktails that are a little tough to get these days unless you're in a really great bar with a great bartender. Today, as we go drinking with death. We are ready to make some cocktails, but I've got a little bonus for you. You know I'm always trying to give you guys as much content as I can, and I actually found a recipe for Al Capone's favorite pasta sauce, so I'm going to share that with you as well. I've got this beautiful little bar set up, and we are going to make some absolutely fabulous cocktails, but we've got to do a couple of things first. We're going to make an absolutely delicious honey simple syrup and a raspberry simple syrup. Earlier when I said, you can only get this kind of stuff if you go into a really good bar with a really good bartender, that's why. You have to make your own syrups in order to get really good quality cocktails. Let's start with this honey syrup first. It's a cup of water and a half a cup of granulated sugar, a half a cup of honey, and you're going to stir that together really well to dissolve all the sugars off the bottom of the pan and just bring it up to a really light boil. Let it cool a little bit and pour it into a squeeze bottle. It is so good. Let's do this gorgeous raspberry syrup. It's good in so many things. It's a cup of water, a cup and a half of sugar. This one's very sweet. And then I used a carton of raspberries, so it's about a cup. Take your little tool that you use to mash up ground beef and sausage and smash those raspberries, get them all down in that sweet liquid. Bring that to a simmer and let it cook for 2 to 3 minutes. Now you can leave those raspberries in the liquid while it cools and it'll infuse even more flavor. Then you're going to strain it over a glass vessel and get rid of all of those seeds. Just use the back of a wooden spoon to press that mixture through the sieve and get all of the essence of the beautiful raspberries. Once that's cooled down, get yourself a funnel and one of these little tiny strainers and pour that into the squeeze bottle over the strainer just in case you've missed any seeds or pulp. We're going to start with a cocktail called the Bee's Knees, and if that's not 1920s, I don't know what is. I actually order this from time to time. It's absolutely delicious, and it comes in usually a martini glass. So whenever you use a martini glass, you want to chill it first. Take a scoop of ice, just put a little bit of water in that, and let that glass get frosty cold. If you're an expert cocktail maker, you already know all of this. But if you're not, this is called a Boston shaker, and it's the best way to get a great cocktail. Sometimes you see them with a matching lid that's got the strainer built in. Those are fine. I just prefer the old-fashioned way, which is a glass and a shaker. Ice and liquids always go in the glass portion of a Boston shaker. All but one of these cocktails today is going to be a gin cocktail. Why? Because it was prohibition and people were making gin in their bathtubs. You've heard the phrase bathtub gin. Well, that was a real thing. And the reason that these cocktails are so flavored and have such great syrups and fruits and other things is because they were trying to hide the terrible taste of the homemade gin. Now, we don't really have to worry about that, so we're going to use some really good gin today. This cocktail calls for 2 ounces of gin, 3/4 ounces of fresh squeezed lemon juice. I'm going to put in about 3/4 ounces of this gorgeous honey syrup that we made. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. Now before you shake, you're going to dump the ice out of your chilled glass. So I'm going to do that now in my sink. See, look at how that glass is nice and frosty now. It's cold. Pop the top half of your Boston shaker over your tumbler and create a seal. Now you're going to flip it because when you set it down, you want the silver part to be on the bottom. Crack that seal. Grab your strainer. Get your nice cold glass. And garnish this little beauty with a lemon wedge. Let's give this one a taste. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Bye. Oof, that is really good. Oh, sorry for the lipstick on the rim. I hated people like me when I tended bar. That is just perfectly balanced. The gin, the honey, the lemon, it just makes a delicious cocktail. And cocktails should be delicious. You should be able to taste the liquor, but it shouldn't be overpowering. They shouldn't be sickly sweet. They shouldn't be too sour. A beautiful cocktail is perfectly balanced. So there you have it, the Bee's Knees. And it is the Bee's Knees. Our second cocktail today is a prohibition cocktail called the Clover Club. And we're going to serve it in this little kind of shorty wine glass or aperitif glass. Now here's another thing you don't see anymore in the bars because you can't have raw egg in most establishments. It's kind of a food hazard. But this cocktail calls for a whipped egg white, and we're going to do it. Just give that a little bit of a whisk. Puts a little air into it, and it changes the consistency of the cocktail. Into the glass half of our Boston shaker goes the ice. 2 ounces of gin, the beaten egg white, an ounce of this gorgeous raspberry syrup, we need a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. Pop the top of that shaker on. And this drink is served with a twist, and here's the easiest way to make it. Take a potato peeler, carrot peeler, give yourself a little tiny thin slice of that rind. Then this is the twist part. Give it a little twist over the glass to release all of those oils and kind of run it around the edge of the glass. So when the person goes to drink it, they smell all that lemon oil. Drop that in the bottom and strain this gorgeous drink. Look at that beauty. This is the Clover Club cocktail. Let's give it a taste. Cheers. That is unbelievable. Ooh, if I could get cocktails like this everywhere I went, I'd probably be in trouble. That is absolutely delicious. The egg white gives a little froth and a little bit of viscosity, and the raspberry syrup is just bursting fresh fruit, sweet, absolutely delicious. This next cocktail is called the Mary Pickford, and it was named after a really popular 1920s actress. And again, it's served in a martini glass, so let's chill it. 2 ounces of white rum. This is a brand that comes out of Salt Lake City, and I always try to buy locally when I can, but this is called Dented Brick, and it's really good rum. Feel free to hit me up, Dented Brick. 1.5 ounces of pineapple juice, a teaspoon of grenadine. That's a lot of grenadine. And then you can either do a few drops of maraschino cherry liqueur. My liquor store is run by the state and it does not carry things like that. So if you don't get that in your area where you're at, you can always just use a few drops of cherry juice. And then of course, we're gonna put a maraschino cherry in there. Flip it. And drop a beautiful cherry down in there. You can use a maraschino cherry if you want, but I have these gorgeous dark morello cherries and I'm gonna use one of those. The Mary Pickford. Cheers. Very tropical, very reminiscent of a pina colada with a different texture, very much sitting on the beach or sitting by the pool having a drink. You know I'm always trying to give out the most information and the best information I can find, so I'm gonna give you a little bonus today, and we're gonna make Al Capone's favorite pasta sauce. Now you're gonna cook 2 servings of pasta, so let's get that boiling. Okay, here is our spaghetti all cooked. I put a little olive oil on it, set it aside, and let's do the sauce. We're gonna start with 2 nice big cloves of garlic. You don't need to chop them or anything because they're going in the blender. To the blender, you're gonna add a cup of chopped walnuts. So you know where this is going, right? This is just a different take on a pesto sauce. Instead of using pine nuts, we're gonna use walnuts. I'm following the recipe. Otherwise, I might have toasted these to just bring out the oils and get that roasty, toasty flavor, but I didn't say to do that, and you know I try to be as authentic as I can. It calls for a cup of Italian parsley. Add that in. And I'm gonna chop some of that for a garnish because who doesn't love fresh parsley on top? Okay, pop your lid on and give that just kind of a rough pulse. Now you're gonna add about 1.5 cups of good olive oil. Looks so good, right? A big pinch of kosher salt, at least a good teaspoon or so, and at least a 1/2 teaspoon of fresh pepper. And then you're gonna grate some Parmesan cheese, add it, and reserve some to top it. Oh look, the tip broke off. Let's add that cheese in. Say that's about 1/3 cup. Let's give that a blend. What I read said Al Capone liked to top his dish with a little bit of fresh chopped tomato. Okay, I've got my nice warm pasta here, I've got my sauce, and I've got my garnishes. Look at that little Italian flag. Now, there's several ways that you could dress this. You could toss it tableside, you could put the sauce on top, or you could do it the way I'm gonna do it, which is a little sauce on the bottom, pasta, more sauce on top. A beautiful little nest of pasta. And now let's garnish. A little Parmesan cheese, a little fresh tomato, and a little fresh Italian parsley. I've got one of my fabulous cocktails here, and you need it with all this garlic and salt. Let's give this a taste. That is very, very good and unusual. I don't know that I've had a pasta sauce that tastes exactly like that before. It's earthy and woody and nutty. And you know how Italian parsley has that bright, almost like you're eating grass, you know, you just feel like you're eating the earth? That's what it feels like. That's really what it tastes like and what it feels like in your mouth. It's absolutely delicious. I have to say too, the tomatoes really add to it. That is absolutely fabulous, and I hope you enjoy the little bonus recipe, Al Capone's favorite pasta sauce. Just one more sip. I'm getting to the end thing. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death. Like and subscribe if you would like to see more. Your subscriptions and your views mean everything to us. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.